A little earlier in the day, Kenya's President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta officially opened the third United Nations Environment Assembly on pollution in the Kenyan capital. CGTN's Robert Nagila was there.
Over 4,000 delegates, among them heads of state, business leaders and members of the civil society, are attending the third UNEA Assembly at the United Nations Environmental Programme headquarters in Nairobi. The summit's theme is Towards a Pollution-Free Planet and seeks a concerted global effort to tackle pollution. Kenya's president says the time to act is now.
We have learned an expensive lesson. Unless our environmental riches are protected by all, there can be no lasting prosperity for any of us.
Leaders called for a collective effort and sustained campaign to fight pollution.
Now is not the time to walk backwards. We therefore must act responsibly and recognize the importance of interdependence, of multilateralism, of collective action, and embrace fully the cardinal principle of intergenerational and intragenerational equity in order to combat pollution.
There must be information, education, and communications extended through a sustained campaign aimed at raising awareness of the urgency of eliminating pollution at the level of citizens, households, community, and among all countries.
Some countries have already taken stringent steps to reduce pollution. China says measures already in place will see a fundamental reduction in pollution in its cities by 2020.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping has drawn up an inspiring blueprint for ecological and environmental protection at the 19th Party Congress of the Communist Party of China held last October. By 2020, we will win the battle against pollution by taking tough measures. By 2035, there will be fundamental improvement in the environment.
The UN is calling for concerted global action on pollution and other challenges by tackling unsustainable resource use and engaging the private sector in other measures. The conference ends on Wednesday. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And Robert Nagila, of course, joins us now live from the United Nations Environmental Programme here in the Kenyan capital. Robert, good to see you. Walk us through the highlights of the UN Environmental Assembly so far. What were the key policy discussions that delegates focused on?
Well, Rama, one of the big stories coming out of here today is that nations have agreed to stop plastic waste from entering the oceans. Now, you know that has been a huge problem over the last decade. Now, that resolution is set to be sealed tomorrow, Wednesday, the final day of this conference. And there had been a much stronger motion on the same. However, this was rejected by the United States for obvious reasons. Now, other key elements in tackling pollution that we expect to hear about tomorrow are in the areas of funding. What sort of funding will be required? How will that funding be raised? And where will that funding be allocated? We expect to hear more on that. That is a key element in tackling pollution. We also expect to hear more on a policy framework, because for all these countries to tackle pollution successfully, they all have to be on the same page, and that's why this policy framework is required, so that everybody can be on the same page, fighting with the same standards and with the same vigor and energy required to reduce this pollution menace. Rama?
Indeed. So UNEP focusing very strongly on pollution at this event, but let's step back a bit and try and quantify the problem here. What's the real environmental, social and economic cost of pollution across its many forms in sub-Saharan Africa today?
Rama, where do I start? This could take forever. Now, the UN says that 1 in 4 people, the deaths of 1 in 4 people globally are as a result of environmental degradation. We've not even begun talking about the health sector, how much countries have to pour into that to deal with the illnesses as a result of environmental degradation and the impact it has on their economies, because this affects their workforce. And if you don't have a healthy workforce, really, then your economy will suffer as a result. And then, of course, you talk about climate change, the impact it's had on food security, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. You look at the migration of people across sub-Saharan Africa. Partly this has to do something with climate change. It has affected the very fabric of our societies here in Africa. And unless nations come together to do something about it, that impact is going to be huge. Remember, as environmentalists keep telling us, the environment doesn't need us. We need that environment, and we need to leave a better environment for future generations. So humanity is at stake here. That's exactly what we're talking about. The impact of this cannot be quantified in terms of in money, in the financial sense, because it's much, much bigger than that, Rama. So the message coming out of the UNEP here today is that it's time to act, and we need to do something about it immediately. Some countries are still yet to be on board, the United States, for example, in certain areas. But perhaps the biggest change that we're seeing here is the effort by China, the steps they've taken, the steps President Xi Jinping has put in place to try and combat pollution in the major cities around China, and the impact it's going to have not just on people's lives, but on China's economy. And perhaps this is a model that most countries need to be looking at, a model they need to adopt for the sake of the survival of their people. Rama?